Hey there and welcome back to my channel. Today I thought it'd be fun to talk about some eyeshadow palettes that I didn't buy for YouTube. In other words, palettes that I bought and I didn't really think that they'd get the views. Most of the palettes I buy are secondhand, and really at the end of the day, this hobby is because I love to play with eyeshadow. YouTube is a really fun way to express that, build community, find friends. I don't necessarily buy palettes because I think that they're gonna generate views or be really popular videos. I buy them because I want to play with eyeshadow. Before I forget, I did film today's eyeshadow look. I'll link it down below in the description box. If you're new here, hey, my name is Rachel. I am a homeschooling stay-at-home mom. I really enjoy colorful eyeshadow. I try to upload several videos a week, but my little children sometimes don't allow for filming. So I actually have a series called While I Was Out, which is where I show you any looks that I didn't have a chance to film, things I did off camera, but I still want to share with you. Now let's get going into this little pile of palettes here. These are palettes that maybe did not go viral, maybe were ignored or swamped in all the other releases and nobody really gave them much screen time or paid much attention to them. But we are all consumers, right? So some of you may have these palettes and there are no videos on them, or a creator mentioned them and talked about how great the palette was and then they never talked about it again because they too had tons of new things coming in for PR or whatever. I want this hobby always to be joyful for me, and therefore I don't want to put the pressure on myself to get a palette because it's popular, especially if I don't really care for it. I think that that is fiscally irresponsible at best, but also it would just, I don't know, I think it would suck some of the fun out of the hobby if I'm allowing myself to be swayed by what's popular right now. I always want to bring in new products which fill a gap in my collection or are an improvement on formula or performance from something else in my collection. Things that interest me or spark creativity, and that's what these palettes are. You'll have to let me know in the comments if you have any of these palettes. If you think I'm wrong, like maybe I just missed the hype and this palette was popular before I ever jumped on the scene, or I wasn't watching the right videos and the people that I was watching weren't talking about it. I don't know. Please let me know in the comments because I think that would be a fun conversation to have. Let's start with the Still Pretty palette from September Rose Cosmetics. I got this one because I wanted a pink and red palette. Originally I got, instead of this, the Cherry on Top palette from the BH Sweet Shop series, and that was a good palette, really good formula. I ended up passing it along when this went on a steep sale because at the core I really wanted this one. This one offers more colors than the Cherry on Top palette. It has purple, it has gold, it has depth. It's not just a red palette. So this one's more well-rounded. The formula is good. I think it's a very pretty palette. I don't use it as much lately, probably because my collection is simply larger. I also recently got the Verona Love and Death palette from Nomad Cosmetics, and that has a lot of reddy pinky tones as well. So I'm pretty well covered on those bases, but this is a good palette. By the way, everything that I'm talking about today, yes, everything that I'm talking about, there are videos on my channel using these palettes. So if you're curious, you can find videos. And I think I have a playlist for every brand that is mentioned today. So you could search my channel for that playlist and you'd find these videos. Okay, so Still Pretty palette. It is really, well, pretty. It is really pretty. It's got nice colors. I like that it has lightness to depth. I wish that there were a lighter matte. These two mattes are actually a lot more mid-toned than they look. When I put them on the eye, I'm always thinking, oh, that's darker than I wanted. I wish it were pastel. So, I mean, it could have been done a little bit better, but it's a pretty palette. Next, I want to talk about the Sydney Grace Tropicolor palette. This is quite new to my collection. I fell in love with Sydney Grace formula through their Quintessence palette when they collaborated with Temptalia. A fellow YouTuber gave that palette to me and I was just floored. I was blown away by the quality of the Sydney Grace shadows. So when I saw this one on sale, because most of their palettes are quite neutral, but this one is not. This is when they collaborated with Tina from the Fancy Face. They have beautiful singles and this palette is full of some of their very, very, very pretty colors. It's amazing. The quality of this palette is fantastic. And often when I am considering a palette, I'll go on YouTube and try to find videos like, what are people saying about this? There were some channels that talked about this palette, but then I never heard anybody mention it again. And that's the problem is, people will rave about a palette, but there's so much always being released. We don't have time to enjoy what we've got. So this palette, I think, is beautiful. It's really fun to play with. I get amazing looks from this palette. The formula is fantastic. The mattes are so easy to work with and the shimmers are highly pigmented and very shiny and sparkly. Super good. Here's kind of a boring neutral palette, and yet it's not. This is the La Cienega palette from Adept Cosmetics. This is the newest one out of today's pile. I got this one because I wanted to round out my collection a bit more as far as neutrals. This isn't totally neutral. As you can see, it has some more reddish berry tones. It's more mauve leaning as well. And this I think is the most matte heavy palette that Adept has. But then of course it has these stunning shimmers on the bottom. I find that there are 3 different formulas in these shimmers. One is a pretty standard shimmer formula, one is more of a toppery formula, and then the third one is a bit more creamy and a little bit chunky. Kind of like a comparable formula in Udenzai. They have a formula that's like that. Anyway, I think this palette's really pretty. This one was, if nothing else, then it was under the radar. This palette wasn't talked about a lot because it was launched as part of a mystery box. There was a whole debacle. I can card above the recent video that I made telling you generally what that was and using this palette. But aside from the drama, I think the palette's really pretty. I like more cool toned neutrals and I like combining them with really remarkable shimmers. So this palette fit the bill perfectly. Another palette that I didn't see too many people talking about was the Strawberry Feels palette from Jaclyn Cosmetics. This palette is totally unremarkable. It really is. I mean, it's not terrible quality. It's decent, but it's unremarkable in that it's not the most fantastic, wild, exciting color story, nor is it the most impressive formula, quite frankly. But I keep it because I like the colors. I like these softer, more berry and red leaning pinky tones. I think it's sort of harvesty. There's enough contrast that I can get some lightness and some depth as well. Of course, a deeper matte would have been fun, but honestly, I reach for this palette when I want A, a very predictable look, and B, a very reliable look. It's always going to give me exactly that. It's not going to blow anybody out of the water. Sometimes that's not really what I'm going for. Sometimes I want something that's just a bit more downplayed. These colors, but softer. And this formula actually doesn't have much staying power. It will fade throughout the day. So if I'm specifically looking for something that's more subdued and quiet, just a hint of color, a hint of shimmer, then I reach for this one and it does what I need it to do. This is not going to be a very long video today. I can hear my children starting to wake up. The sun is rising through that window right there, so things are going to start feeling yellow. So let's kind of get moving through these last 2 palettes. Here is the Through My Eyes palette. When ColourPop collaborated with Iluvsarahii, I thought that this palette was such an interesting color story. The way that she paired bronze and teal and like a wine sort of burgundy tones, it's really interesting. I haven't seen this sort of color story anywhere else. I would say it's ColourPop's good, not amazing, but definitely good formula. I think that the palette is well varied. There's obviously some lightness, some depth, and then lots of midtones. And I mean, there's nothing that's redundant in here. Even these mattes right here, this is definitely a pink matte over here, and then this is more of a sandy sort of color. The shimmers are different as well. There are no duplicates in here. There's enough variety to give you lots of different options. The size is convenient, it's compact, it's not too large, it's not too small, it's got a good mirror. I could bring this traveling and I would have a really nice assortment of colors and neutrals, depth and lightness, shimmers, mattes. It's a good palette, and honestly, I have decluttered most of my ColourPop palettes at this point, and yet this one still holds on. And finally, my favorite neutral palette. Ooh, could I say that anymore? There's one that may have toppled that from the throne. I don't know. Anyway, this is the Nouveau palette from Anastasia Beverly Hills. I grabbed this palette, almost everything I buy is secondhand. This also was secondhand. I think that this palette is so interesting. It's so cool. It is neutral with a twist. You have obviously some more soft neutral tones, but there are no browns. They're all pinky sort of sage leaning neutrals. The shimmers in here are all different, and honestly the shimmers look better on the eyes than you would think. They look kind of dusty in the pan, but on the eye they translate to be soft and smooth, a little bit creamy, and just easy to work with, you know? A nice solid formula, kind of a refined, sophisticated result. There again are no duplicates in here. It's not a redundant palette. It's a good size. It's a good amount of pans. It's fun to work with. And then this shade right here, which stymied some people, I thought was genius. I think that this shade really makes the palette special. It's kind of a weird shade because it works with both the warmer and the cooler tones of this palette. The undertones of all these shimmers still look beautiful with this lavender shadow. It's very unique, and I think it's really, really pretty. A great genius addition to the palette, honestly, because without that shadow, it's just an ordinary neutral palette, but with it, it's something special. And that closes out today's video. I know it wasn't very long and I was rushing a little bit, but and like I said, that sun is about to start making my video yellow, so I will let you guys go. Thank you so much for being with me here today. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Do remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more content, and I will see you again very soon in my next video. Lord willing, bye!